Hello everyone, welcome to Behind the Canvas. Today we're going to be painting a sculpture of Neptune. So stick around to have a look at my painting process. Right, so the first step I do when I actually start painting is the sketching. The sketching of the composition to me just means that I'll take my subject and after thinking about how I want to paint it and where I want to paint it, I just look at the limits of the subject, and by that I mean the upper limit, the lower limit, the sides, and just sketch those primary lines, if you want to call them like that, onto my canvas, taking into account the negative spaces that I have on the left, on the right, top, bottom, whatever, and make sure that it works. This takes a lot of practice, and you can start by doing it on a piece of paper and take the measurements of your canvas, scale it down, and then try to do it there. But to me, it feels just a bit more organic to just start doing it on the canvas. And so I don't do the details, I don't do anything. I just start with primary lines, primary curves, if you want to call them, with yellow in this case, and just sketch the outline of my subject. Now, moving into the next step, which is the underpainting, I stick to the primary colors. Now, the underpainting for me is just so that I can distinguish the background on the subject a little bit more. And I use the primary colors. The primary colors that I use, because I believe that people have different interpretations of these. But in my case, I go for a ultramarine blue, a cadmium yellow, and magenta or magenta. I'm not sure how to pronounce those. I feel like they all have really strange names. And then in this case, I used the blue uh, for the background, as I didn't want any story being told on the background. It wasn't really that interesting to me, as the subject already tells a big story. And the yellow for the subject. This is a really interesting contrast immediately. You can see it everywhere. And for placing the shadows of the subject, I use the red. It's not as much of a contrast as the blue and the yellow, but it allows me to distinguish it a little bit more uh, than just using yellow and blue. Obviously, you can use a different palette of colors if you want, and it really depends on the type of subject that you're painting. But in my case, I just wanted to keep the subject lively and interesting to the eyes, um, and so I stuck with the primary colors. Now the next the next step is building form, and that just basically means that I can start focusing on the subject in more detail without working on the details. I want to bring the volume. I want to give it more volume, work on the shadows, work on the color combinations a little bit more. Now, building the form means that you're gonna have to imagine it a little bit more in a 3D way. You're gonna have to imagine, or you're gonna have to understand a little more what you're seeing. It's not just about looking at the lines and the limits of a painting, of a photograph or a sculpture, whatever it is that you have in front of you. You're not just doing that. You're also trying to understand the the volume of your subject. In this case, I'm trying to understand the way in which Neptune's body is positioned, because he's twisted, he's in tension, he's about to stab a monster, he's in battle. So this allows me to stop for a minute and think, okay, what can I do as a painter to bring that action that I'm seeing in 3D, because this was a sculpture, in and represent it in the best way possible on my canvas? How can I represent those in this case those muscles and that tension? How can I represent those shadows and the way the light reflects on the body in the best way possible. This is building form. You can imagine it like with a different example. If you've ever played with Play-Doh or plasticine or some sort of sculpting material, you start to do that at this point. You start maybe with a ball of clay or whatever, and then you start giving it form. You start to bring in the details, but you're not doing it in that case. You're obviously not doing it in 2D, you're doing it in 3D. It's much easier to see what works and what doesn't. In this case, you have to really pay attention now. Like this is no longer, like I said before, the composition should be done. That should be already decided. That you shouldn't correct that, or not. It's not that you shouldn't correct it, but um, now that you're focusing on the subject, you should really double your attention. At least I try to do that whenever I'm at this stage. So the next step is just going over again my subject. In this case, I'm just focusing on the subject and sitting down and taking a couple minutes to think, okay, where do I need to focus a little bit more? Where do I need to give it a tiny bit more priority and bring in a lot more volume? So in this case, for me, it's pretty obvious. It's the face. If the face of Neptune doesn't work, the rest of the painting will not work. No matter how well I paint the body, or if I had a background, no matter how well those elements interact, if the face of the subject does not work, the rest of the painting will not. Because the face tells so much of the story. He is obviously in battle, so he is I don't know, maybe stressed, or he's really focused, or he's angry, or he is worried for his survival. I don't know. Not that he needs to be worried about that, but I just want you to understand that all of these things are represented or are conveyed through his face. So what I do for this is I grab a little bit of blue, maybe a little bit of burnt umber, I start mixing it a tiny bit, and then I bring out that face out of the details that I already had, or the volume that I had already painted before. And that's it. Like, I am still not doing complex color combinations. I'm not really putting that much attention to my brush stroke, and I'm not paying attention um, to very important details like the eyes. As you can see right now, like the eyes that are covered behind my hand, well, the eyes are not there. It's just the area in which they will be needs to work. Everything needs to start working here. This is kind of in my eyes, it's a bit more important than the details. So the following phases, because it's a kind of point of no return, more or less. When you get to the final touches and the final details, you can still correct that. And yes, one little brush stroke can obviously make a very big difference to your painting, but it's not the same as if you have a face that's not well proportioned, or a face that doesn't convey what you want it to convey. And for me, you can now start to see that he is in tension now, that he is um, worried that he's in battle again, like I mentioned before. So this is really important. Now, as you probably noticed, there is a little bit of yellow and white combined to bring out the highlights of the face. And I'm also using blue with burnt umber to sink in the shadows a little bit more. Um, this is really important to me. It brings in, it closes in that expression that I'm looking for. Now I did a pause from the face because I cannot be focusing on details the entire time. It's too strenuous, and I moved on to the background. Again, I said before that the background is not important to me, but then maybe it's maybe it was the wrong thing to say. It's not that it's not important, it's just not as important as the subject. And I thought that a plain color is just too boring. There is nothing going on there. So I added a little bit of red in the lower portion of the painting because I feel like red is often associated with danger or fire or something bad. I mean, you see it a lot in warnings, street warnings, for example, and that's enough for me to think that the background is interesting. Um, Obviously, you can add more detail if you want, or you can see it in a different way. But to me, this is enough to maybe suggest that whatever is on the lower portion of the painting that is not being showed on the painting is dangerous, is evil, or it's yeah, it's enough. It's enough. You don't. I feel like I don't like to distract the whoever looks at my paintings by then adding more elements to that, unless they're balanced, unless they tell a relevant part of the story and they fit to what I plan to do with this painting. In this case, like I said before, I just am focusing on the body and on the subject itself. So a couple of a couple of colors in the background is enough. I don't need to do more of that. And as you can see now I'm moving into the main part of the body and bringing in that those colors for the arms, the highlights for the arms, and the rest of the torso. But I'm not going into too much effort. I'm not giving it too much effort because again, I keep repeating myself, but I think it's really important to know that you've prioritized the right elements on your painting. now we finally get to the details and the texture work. Like I mentioned before, I was focusing on the face of the painting as this is the area that tells the story. And for this, I went for a really thin brush and for very punctual brush strokes. I wanted the brush strokes to really matter. It's no longer about building a very big uh, section of color that will basically form or work as a base for something else. This is more about the individual brush strokes telling a specific detail on their own. That's why you see me um, be very slow with my work right now. I'm trembling a little bit because I'm trying to be precise. I'm trying to not make too many mistakes, not have to correct myself too much. And this is, yeah, takes a little bit of time, and you kind of have to really look at what you're doing with patience. You cannot rush this. I don't like rushing the details because, as I said before, just a tiny bit of change or a tiny bit of a mistake, let's call it like that, can really change the entire mood of the painting. So I don't know, before I start with this, I take my time, I kind of plan what I want to do with the brush strokes, and then I start painting. So in regards to the colors that I'm using, I'm adventuring myself a little more and putting out color combinations, still using the same color palette that I was using at the beginning. For the eyes, for example, right now I'm not using black. That's not black. That is the combination of the blue with the burnt umber, and I think I used a very small amount of red to make this really deep blue for the eyes and for the shadows surrounding the eyes. And I'm just using a very small amount of it because, as you can tell, it really stands out, and I don't want those crevices on the face to really uh, deform the face and make the character look a little bit older than it actually is, or with a different like as make just change the character completely from the original source. And just like I did with the darker colors of the character, I am also doing the same with the highlights. I took the same color combination that I used for the skin of the character, and I added a ton of white to bring up the highlights, bring out the highlights. Obviously, I'm trying to be precise and not to overdo it because just like with the dark colors, this would create a ton of contrast, maybe more than I wanted to. So it's important to keep that in check and to be aware of how much white you're adding to the color mix and to the location. In this case, I feel like the face really needed um, a lot of highlight spots because we're dealing with the beard of the character, the expression in the face creates a lot of opportunities for us to bring in more contrast and to bring in this drama that you're seeing. But I didn't continue this with the rest of the body because the body is a bit more, I don't want to say simple, but it's not, again, it's not the focus of the painting. And if you see here, I stopped with the white and I went for a sort of like a light blue combination for the eyelids. And this is very difficult. At least for me, to be very precise, the eyes are super difficult for me to paint whenever I'm doing a portrait or uh, a piece that has eyes. I mean, you immediately notice if there's something wrong with them. Now, the final touches for me was basically just looking at the whole painting and figuring out what things I still needed to do. I'm not sure if I would call them details. It's not, and definitely not detailed work. At least in this case, I was focusing on the hand of the character, which is holding a trident or a spear or something like that. And I hadn't worked on it enough. And but I also didn't want to make the hand compete with the face, so I didn't go in for a ton of detail when painting it. So as you can see, I'm just giving it really um, broad brush strokes, making sure that they make sense and that you can more or less from afar tell that it's a hand, but nothing more than that. I'm not going in for real shadows and highlights and the rest of the work that I did for the face. Now, something I forgot to mention was the corrections I did to the painting, and the first one and the major one was actually the arm behind the head of the character. I felt like it was in the wrong position, and even with what I said before that you should really plan and try to fit your character or your subject in the canvas appropriately, this can still happen. And honestly, like, if it happens, then just cover it, correct it. It doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't matter. And that's what I did. I just marked the new limits of the arm. And again, since this wasn't really part of the main focus of the painting, I gave myself the freedom to think, okay, I'll just paint the blue of the background on top of it and be done with it. And that's exactly what I did. I don't know if I would have done the same with the face, to be honest, if I had had a little bit more, if I had made more mistakes with the face of the character, I might have not continued the painting and actually started a new one. But since this was just the arm and not the focus of the painting, I didn't really care too much about it. For the abdomen part of the character, the shadows at the beginning were supposed to be in my head a bit more dramatic with red, but somehow that didn't really come through when I was painting it, so I decided to just go for blue again. So I started painting it over, and I think it works a little bit better. I was also having the thought about leaving them red or experimenting a little bit more with red as it would be a reflection of the lower part of the painting, signaling that there is something dangerous in the lower part, just like I did with the background and the red color. But I don't know, it wasn't convincing enough um, for me at the end. So to finish off, I left the lower part of the body untouched. I didn't want to hide my painting process, and I think it works. I think you can see the underpainting. I think you can see the sketching quite well, and I don't know. I find it really interesting whenever I get to see other works from other artists and get to identify their painting process.